The snow fell like ash, quiet, stubborn, thick. It blanketed the platform boards until footsteps vanished as fast as they came, until the rails sang no more, until silence took the place of speech. Morning light broke slow over the town of Mercy's Ridge, casting long shadows on the white. And lying at the edge of it, half hidden by the drift, was a girl most had already decided not to see. Her name was Wisa Brightstream, though not a soul in town had ever asked it. Her long dark hair lay matted to the ice, streaked with blood, snowflakes tangled in her lashes. The old wound beneath her ribs had reopened sometime during the night, seeping warmth into the cold earth. Her dress, once blue, clung to her legs like soaked parchment, torn at the seams, dirt-stained and worn to thread. She had collapsed sometime before dawn. No one saw her arrive. No one asked. Iris Hodge, who ran the mercantile, saw her first from the shop window. She narrowed her eyes, wiped the pain with her apron, and turned away. "She's back," Iris muttered under her breath to no one in particular. The girl from the hollow. Don't know why the snow didn't finish her last winter. Beside her, Sheriff Amos Pike paused over his coffee. He looked, once. Briefly. Then went back to nursing the warmth in his hands. "What do you suppose she wants?" Iris hissed. "To die, maybe," he said. "Some folks just don't belong." But the train had brought someone else to Mercy's Ridge that morning. A shadow too broad for the platform, too silent for the season, stepped down into the snow and didn't look back. Bare-chested, moccasin-footed, hair tied in black cord behind his shoulders, Tama, the half-feared Apache man who lived beyond the North Ridge, far past the cottonwoods. He was 31 years old, and though the war was gone from paper, it still lived in his shoulders. Scars like whip marks ribboned across his back, reminders of where he'd once knelt for a treaty made with guns. No one knew why he'd come to town that day, just that the sky seemed to flinch when he walked beneath it. He carried nothing but a wrapped bundle of hides, a pouch of dried herbs, and a single glance that never lingered. He saw her. She was folded at the end of the bench, breath faint against her lips, skin the gray-blue of things slipping into the other side. And still, something inside her waited. Her lashes fluttered like they remembered birds. Her chest rose like it hadn't quite given up on song. Tama did not hesitate. He moved to her side and bent down slowly, the snow groaning under his knees. The way he touched her, careful, as if she were made of smoke and would vanish if handled wrong, betrayed something no one had known lived inside him. Wisa's eyes flickered open. They were dark, rimmed in red, crusted with frost. She blinked twice, her lips trying to shape something that never came. Finally, in a whisper broken like thin glass, she managed a few words. "Don't take me back." Tama did not answer. But she felt the strength in his arms as he lifted her, one under her knees, the other at her back. Her head dropped against his bare shoulder. She smelled cedar and ash and something older than fire. Iris stood outside the mercantile now, arms folded, mouth twisted. "You gonna carry her through the whole winter?" she called out. "Let nature do what it started, savage." Tama didn't glance her way. The cold didn't seem to touch him. Sheriff Amos stood at the steps of the jail, watching with narrowed eyes. His hand hovered above the grip of his pistol, but never reached it. "She's tribal," someone muttered. "Could be diseased. She's got blood on her dress." "They're both wild." A small boy pointed from his mother's coat hem. "Mama, is she dead?" "No, child," she said softly. "But maybe she ought to be." Tama stepped past them all. He walked through their silence, their judgment, their cowardice, and mounted his horse with Wisa cradled like fallen light. His chest steamed against the snow, his arms bare to the wind, a living defiance to every name they'd ever called him. He adjusted her weight gently, pulled a buffalo hide cloak over her, and without a word or backward glance, turned toward the ridge and vanished into the trees. No one stopped him. No one offered a word. And yet, every soul who stood at that station that morning would remember it forever. The ride home was quiet. Wind rapped through pine like breath through prayer beads. His horse moved steady beneath them, the snow slowing them to a hush. Wisa stirred once, murmured something about a hawk, then slept again. Tama didn't try to rouse her. He let the silence be her medicine. By the time the cabin appeared, half buried in snow and tucked beneath the lean of an ancient cedar, dusk was dimming the world to ash. He laid her down before the fire, careful as a father placing his child in a cradle. The floor creaked under his weight. A kettle hissed on the edge of the hearth, and soon broth simmered: bone, marrow, salt, wild onion. He broke pieces of dried root and soaked them in a bowl, grinding them to paste. He did not speak. He peeled her dress away from the wound, slowly, reverently, until the torn skin showed raw and purple and full of pain. His fingers, thick and calloused, moved like feathers. He pressed his salve into the wound, then bound it with strips of soft deer hide. She flinched, but did not wake. He sat beside her after, watching the flames eat the cold. The light danced across her skin, casting golden shapes on her cheek. Her fingers twitched. Her mouth opened in a silent word. Tama watched her like one might watch a snowflake land on warm skin, hoping it stayed, but knowing it would melt. Later that night, while she slept, her hand slid from the blanket and brushed his. He didn't move. Just let her fingers rest there, soft and open like a child trusting the dark. In the morning, he rose early. Chopped wood with no shirt, sweat mixing with snow until steam lifted off his back. His breath came slow and rhythmic. 1 log, 2, 3. A rhythm not of anger, but of ritual. Survival. His own offering to the gods of warmth and second chances. Inside, she stirred. Eyes opening slowly, taking in the beams of light across the cabin, the carved eagle above the door, the smell of broth and bear fat and pine smoke. She blinked. And saw him through the window, bare-chested and silent, splitting the world open with each swing of the axe. And something in her heart, bruised and beaten as it was, moved. Not in fear. Not in confusion. But in the tiniest flicker of belonging. She awoke to the scent of broth and wood smoke, thick as memory. The rafters above her were dark, hand-hewn and groaning with old age. Shadows flickered across the walls like ghosts unsure if they belonged. Wisa blinked slowly. Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked. Pain echoed down her side like a storm had taken up residence in her ribs. The blanket over her was too soft to be town-made. It smelled of cedar bark and something older, deeper wildness, maybe. Or solitude. A fire crackled a few feet away, steady and alive. Across from it sat a bowl, steaming, untouched, as if it had waited for her. She tried to sit. Failed. Her arms gave out. Breath caught hard in her chest. Then, a quiet sound, leather against wood. He was there. Tama. He moved without rush, without spectacle. Shirtless still, with a fur pelt wrapped around his lower half and moccasins softening his steps, he came into the room like someone who belonged to silence. Not once did he speak. Not once did he flinch. He crouched beside her and lifted her gently, placing a carved bowl in her hands. The stew within was thick and warm and tasted like mercy. Wisa ate slowly, eyes never leaving his. She didn't trust him, not yet. But there was something in the way he didn't look away, didn't shrink back when her wound reopened from the trembling of her hand. She finished. He took the bowl without asking, rinsed it with snow, and set it on the edge of the hearth. Only then did he speak. You need more days. His voice was rough stone, rolled smooth by rivers of grief. Deep. Gentle. Worn. She nodded faintly. Where am I? My home. You live alone? He nodded once. Wisa looked down at her body. Her dress was gone. She wore one of his shirts now, heavy, lined with fur at the collar. Her legs were wrapped in pelts, her feet in rabbitskin slippers clearly handmade. You tended my wounds. Another nod. You saw everything? I saw someone trying to die. The words didn't carry judgment. Just truth. Truth so simple it didn't need to be defended. She turned her head, ashamed. Tama didn't reach for her. Didn't console. He just rose, stepped out into the snow, and left the door open long enough for the wind to kiss her cheeks. When he returned, he carried bundles, dried herbs, berries, carved roots, and strips of jerky tied in waxed cloth. He worked beside her without a word, crushing bark into powder, steeping willow in hot water, placing salves into wooden jars. She watched, fascinated. Everything had a place. Every motion told a story. "How long was I out?" she asked finally. 3 nights. Maybe 4. "You didn't send for anyone?" "They wouldn't come." She knew he was right. The town didn't come for people like her. Or like him. "You could have left me," she whispered. He didn't look up from the fire. "I don't leave the dying. I bury them or I carry them." She stared at him. The scar down his back glinted in the firelight, white as a hand and pale as sorrow. She didn't ask where it came from. He didn't offer. That night, she dreamed. The snow was red in her sleep. Red from the blood of her past. Her father's voice chased her through the woods, "You're not my daughter. Not if you choose the broken path." Then the man from the trading post, his hands, rough and unforgiving, grabbing, bruising. Her scream had echoed across the canyon, unheard. She woke with a start, sweat cooling on her forehead. The fire had died down to coals. The shadows had grown long. Tama sat beside the fire, sharpening a blade with deliberate slowness. But he looked at her now, just once, his eyes holding hers like they could keep the dream from swallowing her whole. "I won't ask you to tell me," he said. "But when you're ready, I'll listen." She didn't reply. But her body softened against the bedding. In the following days, something shifted. She began to rise, inch by inch, first to wash her hands, then to carry her bowl, then to step outside. Tama made no show of praise. He simply made room. They spoke little. But silence became its own kind of closeness. She watched him carve antler buttons, hands steady, eyes soft with focus. In turn, he watched her braid her hair for the first time since the snow found her. Neither of them smiled. But something warm passed between them when their eyes met, an ember, not yet flame. Once, while stirring broth, her hand shook too badly to hold the ladle. He stepped behind her without a word, laid his hand over hers, and stirred with her. She didn't pull away. Nor did he press forward. The moment lived in quiet breath. Another time, she found a folded strip of leather on her pillow. Inside it, a carved hawk feather on a string, painted red at the tip. No note. No signature. But it smelled of cedar and smoke, like him. She wore it the next day. Outside, winter deepened. Winds howled down from the ridge like spirits protesting the world's slowness to heal. Snow rose to the bottom of the windows. Wood had to be chopped daily, fire fed twice by night. Tama worked shirtless, even in storm. His body moved through the snow like it was born of it. Muscles flexed, breath steaming, hair tied back with a strip of deer hide. Wisa watched from the window once, and something inside her, some small, half-dead thing, thawed. He came inside one night with red hands, his skin burned from handling ice. She grabbed his hands without asking and pressed warm cloth to them, holding tight. He didn't move. Didn't even breathe. She didn't let go until the cloth cooled. That night, he placed a bowl of hot water at her bedside with wild mint floating in it. She knew what it meant. I see your care. I return it. On the 5th morning, she found the strength to gather snow in a pail and boil it. She set dried root and juniper inside, stirred it slow, and offered it to him as he walked in with firewood. He paused. Took the cup. Sipped. Then nodded. Nothing more was needed. But the world outside was not still. It whispered. In town, Iris Hodge saw them pass weeks ago and hadn't let go of it. She fed every ear that would listen. She's with him now, you know. That girl from the hollow. You remember, the one who got turned out? They say he keeps her like a ghost wife. Don't take your boys past the ridge. Who knows what sins they're brewing up there? Sheriff Amos tried to temper it. But Mercy's Ridge loved a scandal more than a savior. One child, a boy no more than 7, overheard the gossip and carved a figurine, a woman holding a hawk's feather, and slipped it onto Iris's porch with a note that read, "She's not a ghost. She's someone's reason to stay." The boy never admitted it. But Elder Willow found him whittling feathers days later and simply nodded. Back in the cabin, Weesa watched snow slide from the eaves like tired dreams. She said aloud, not looking at Tama, "They hated me for living." He looked at her gently. "And I honored you by not letting you die." That night, they sat beside the fire. She reached for his hand. He let her. They sat like that a long time. Two wounded things, warm for the first time in seasons. And neither of them asked what came next. The snow didn't stop. It came in waves now, soft, relentless, unbothered by the lives beneath it. Whole trees vanished beneath its silence. The trail to town disappeared entirely. It was as though the outside world no longer existed. Inside the cabin, time moved slower. Weesa began to move with more steadiness. She no longer winced with every step, though pain still clung to her ribs like memory. Her hands, once trembling, now stirred broth with confidence, folded hides, stacked firewood in neat, careful piles. Every gesture, small but certain, was her way of taking up space again. Not asking for permission, just proving, with every breath, that she was still here. Tama never praised her with words. But sometimes, when she lit the hearth before he returned from trapping, she'd find a gift laid near her side of the bedding, a sprig of sage, a sharpened flint knife wrapped in otter fur, a small carved bison with eyes made from river glass. She never asked if it was from him. He never said. But the silence between them had changed. It no longer hovered like tension, it rested like a warm blanket, heavy and healing. One morning, after snowfall so thick the sky seemed to have forgotten light, she found him seated near the fire, legs crossed, whittling with quiet care. The shape in his hands was unfamiliar, an eagle's wing, she thought, but stylized. She sat near without speaking. After a time, she asked, "Why carve wings in winter?" He didn't look up. "Because wings remember what the wind feels like." That was the kind of answer Tama gave. Simple. Lyrical. True. Later that day, she surprised herself. She reached for one of the small carving knives and began whittling beside him. Her fingers were clumsy, her lines uneven. But she kept going. He noticed. He didn't correct her. That evening, when she left the piece on the mantel, her half-finished attempt at a fox, she found it the next morning cleaned, sanded, and placed inside a pouch beside a dried apple slice. She didn't cry. Not quite. But her hand hovered over the pouch longer than it needed to. Outside, the snow deepened to waist-high. Tama chopped wood in the yard bare-armed again. Weesa, standing at the window, thought him carved from something ancient. His back carried the old scars like runes, marks no one had ever healed. She wanted to run her fingers over them, not to pity, but to honor. She didn't. But she thought about it. And that thought didn't shame her. One night, after she'd fallen asleep by the fire wrapped in the fur he usually wore, she woke to find another blanket over her shoulders and him, seated beside the door, shirtless still, his back to the wall like a sentry. The room was dark but for the dying glow of embers. "You don't have to sleep like that," she murmured. His eyes met hers. "I sleep where I am needed." "And where is that?" "Near you," he said simply. She didn't respond. But in the morning, she woke curled against him. It hadn't been planned. Or spoken. Or asked. But her head was on his shoulder. His arm was beneath her. And the world hadn't ended for it. They didn't speak of it. The next day, she cooked cornbread in the skillet while he patched a tear in the roof. When he came in smelling of pitch and cedar, she served him without a word. He took it. Ate it slowly. And left the last piece on her plate, his quiet way of saying, "I think of you when I'm full." In the early evening, when light barely touched the pines, Weesa ventured farther from the cabin than before. Her boots sank in snow up to her knees. Still, she walked, slow and determined, until she reached the frozen stream. She stood there a long time, watching the surface gleam like hammered silver. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt his presence. Tama stopped beside her, not touching, just watching the stream with her. "This is where I first saw the hawk," he said, surprising her. "When I was 7. After my mother passed. It landed right there. On that branch." She followed his gaze. The branch sagged now, heavy with ice. "It looked at me," he said. "Like it knew I wouldn't cry. Like it understood that some losses don't make noise." Wisa reached out and took his hand. This time, he didn't hesitate. His fingers closed around hers. Not tight. Just sure. They stood like that until the light faded. And that night, when they returned, they shared the same fire blanket. She did not lie down with her back to him. And when her shoulder brushed his chest, she did not move away. He spoke once before sleep claimed them. "I see you," she whispered, "even the parts one lost?" His voice was the last thing she heard before dreams. Especially those. The following days moved like breath, barely noticed, but essential. They lived in a rhythm that didn't need naming. She dried herbs. He sharpened blades. She skinned a rabbit without flinching. He smiled for the first time, just slightly, but she saw it. They laughed once, over burned stew. She had forgotten how her own voice sounded when it carried joy. It startled her. He looked up at the sound, eyes warm. "Your laugh is soft like snow landing on ash," he said. She had to look away. But her cheeks stayed pink the rest of the night. There was a shift then. A breath before the storm. Because even warmth has its test. Late one night, as wind battered the shutters and snow piled high against the door, Wisa sat tracing her fingers over a scar on her leg. She hadn't thought of that day in weeks, but now it returned sharp and hot. The man at the outpost. The hands that didn't care for no. She stood suddenly. Walked to the fire. And without looking at Tama, she said, "There was a man. He didn't move." She continued. "He took from me what he wanted. And then they called me cursed. Said my father's line had weakened. They left me at the canyon edge. Told me to walk." Still, Tama didn't move. She turned to him now. "That's why I was at the station. I wasn't going anywhere. I was just waiting for nothing." The room held its breath. Tama rose. Crossed the floor. He stood before her, broad and silent. Then he knelt. Not in reverence. In recognition. He took her hand and placed it against his chest. "You lived," he said. "You lived, and they didn't see it. But I did." Her fingers curled. She knelt with him. And there, in the firelight, no vows were made. No names were exchanged. But something passed between them more binding than blood. In the morning, she rose before him. And laid the feather pendant he once carved at his bedside. Later that day, when she looked up from stirring stew, he was wearing it around his neck. Neither of them spoke of it. But they knew. The kind of knowing that doesn't need saying. The kind of love that winter listens to. The thaw began slow. Winter hadn't left, snow still clung to branches in shadowed hollows, but the air changed. Not warmer, not yet, but looser, like it no longer held its breath. Sap stirred beneath bark. A hawk circled higher. The world seemed to pause and listen. It had been weeks since Wisa last spoke of the town. Even longer since Tama had set foot in it. But things had shifted between them. No more separate sleeping places. No more silence between gestures. The fire was no longer just heat, it was theirs. Shared. Alive. One morning, Wisa stepped outside in a cloak stitched with her own hands, walking past the edge of the cabin's porch, past the traps and the chopped wood, down to the ridge trail. When she returned, she stood in the doorway for a long time, holding a dry pine branch as if it were a torch of resolve. "They should see I'm alive," she said. Tama looked up from skinning a rabbit. He paused. Wiped his hands. met her eyes. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just nodded once. They rode in before midday. The trail was half melted, slick with new mud and last snow, but the town looked much the same, boards weathered gray, smoke curling from chimneys, wagons groaning under spring restocking. Children played with hoops near the feed store. Dogs barked half-heartedly. But when they arrived, the world stilled. Wisa wore her braids loose, tucked with pine cones and bits of wild blue flowers. Her eyes, though hollow once, now held the steady light of someone who had walked through death and come out holding its name. Tama rode beside her, upright, bare-armed even now, his eyes never leaving hers. People stepped back. Iris Hodge was the first to speak. "Well, look what winter spit back." A few snickers followed. Sheriff Amos Pike looked up from the post office steps and narrowed his eyes. Wisa dismounted without a word. She walked straight to the bakery window, peered in, then turned to Iris, who stood arms crossed outside the general store. "I came for flour," Wisa said, calm as still water. "And needles. That's all." Iris let out a dry laugh. "You've got nerve, coming back here." "I never left," Wisa answered. "I was discarded." "There's a difference." A few passers-by paused. A man with a sack of oats shifted his weight awkwardly. A girl no older than 10 tugged her mother's skirt. "Mama, is that the snow girl?" "Shoo," the woman whispered. Iris stepped forward. "You think you can show up with him?" She nodded toward Tama, "and folks will forget what was said?" "What you were." Wisa looked her full in the eye. "No. I don't want them to forget. I want them to remember what they did to someone who needed help." Iris's mouth opened, then closed. Tama hadn't moved. Not a word. Not a blink. Just stood like a carved stone, broad and unmoved. Sheriff Amos finally spoke. "You here to cause trouble?" "No, sir," Wisa said. "Just want to live." "She's with him now," Iris muttered behind her hand. "Probably some arrangement." "She's free," Tama said then, his first words to any of them. "She chose where to walk." The town did not know how to answer that. A boy stepped forward, no older than 8. From the inside of his coat, he pulled a small carving, an eagle, wings spread, painted with blue at the tips. He held it out to Wisa. "My sister said you were the snow woman. She said you flew back instead of dying." Wisa knelt slowly, took the carving, and smiled softly. "Tell your sister I'm still learning to fly," she whispered. Iris turned away with a scoff, retreating behind the mercantile door. Wisa stood. Her voice rose, not loud, not sharp, but clear. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here to stay where I'm not wanted. I just needed to see it. To know that I could stand in the place I fell and not bow." A silence followed. The kind that comes when something heavy leaves the room. Tama walked toward her and offered his hand. She took it. The sheriff stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I ain't got law against buying flour," he said. "Long as you keep the peace." Wisa nodded. "Then take what you came for." "Then go," he added, but without harshness. "You've already stirred enough tongues." Inside the store, the merchant's wife, silent all this while, placed a full satchel of goods on the counter before Wisa even asked. "No charge," she said. Wisa blinked. "Some debts ain't in coin," the woman murmured. On the ride back, the world felt strangely quiet. The sun dropped behind the ridge, casting their shadows long and blue. Wisa clutched the eagle carving in her lap. Her fingers brushed its edges again and again. "They stared," she said after a while. "Yes. They judged. Yes. But I didn't bend. No." Silence lingered between them until she turned her head toward him, snow in her lashes, and asked quietly, "Are you proud of me?" Tama didn't answer right away. He slowed the horse. Reached into the side pouch. Pulled out a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Unfolded it to reveal a necklace, woven leather, with a stone in the shape of a crescent moon. He leaned and placed it around her neck. She touched it, stunned. "Pride is a weak word," he said. "I see you. That means more." The tears came, but only one fell. That night, in their cabin, she placed the eagle carving on the mantel. She set it beside the fox she had once whittled, now smooth and sealed with resin. Tama brought in firewood, snow melting across his shoulders. She turned as he entered. Her eyes glowed amber in the firelight. "You never asked me what happened before the station," she said. He set the logs down, not breaking her gaze. "I knew you'd tell me when your voice had hands," he replied. She moved toward him, took his hand, and pressed it to her heart. "My voice is here now," she whispered. And for the first time, they kissed. Not with fire, but with truth. Not rushed, not claimed. Just two people choosing. The first spark was small. Just a flicker from a stray ember in the wind, an accident born of carelessness, or something more deliberate. The townsfolk would argue about it for weeks, but no one would claim the act. All they'd agree on was that fire began behind the shed, near the stacked kindling where Tama kept dry pine logs, his winter stores, cut by hand, lifted from snow with aching shoulders. It caught quickly. The cold had dried the outer bark. Flames leapt like breath finally released. Wisa saw it first from the cabin window. A strange orange dancing where no fire belonged. "Tama," she called, her voice tight. He was already moving, already outside, his moccasins crunching snow, shoulders bare to the cold. His body moved with urgency, no fear, just the steady rhythm of someone who'd fought worse flames. She grabbed the water bucket, sprinted after him, the cold burning her lungs. The fire was halfway up the wall when they arrived. Smoke curled thick. Sparks leapt and bit. Inside the shed, bundles of dried pelts and food hung from hooks, things they could not afford to lose. Tama threw open the door and stepped through the heat. Wisa tried to follow. "No," he barked, sharp for the first time. But she didn't listen. She ran inside anyway. The smoke swallowed her. Inside, heat warped the walls. Tama pulled down the hanging pelts, stamped at embers, dragged out sacks. Wisa fumbled through the dark, coughing, eyes burning, her fingers searching for the medicine bundle strung from the far beam, the herbs Elder Willow had given them, meant for sickness and birth. She got it. But the moment she turned, the beam cracked. It splintered fast. And fell. Tama saw it. He didn't think. He dove, arms outstretched, catching her body with his and turning so his back took the blow. The beam struck his ribs. He grunted, sharp and deep. She gasped beneath him, buried in his warmth, the medicine pouch still clutched in her hand. Outside, the fire hissed as snowflakes landed on hot wood. A few townsmen, drawn by the smoke, arrived too late to help. They stood at a distance, unsure if they were allowed to step forward. It was Wisa who emerged first. Coughing, covered in soot, dragging Tama by the arm as he limped, chest heaving, skin blistered across his shoulder. His eyes were open, barely. He did not cry out. The shed crackled behind them and caved. She lowered him into the snow. A few townsfolk rushed forward then, buckets, blankets, too little, too late. Iris stood on the edge of the street, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Wisa held Tama's head in her lap. Her hands shook. She whispered things in Lakota, in English, in a language only pain understands. "You stubborn, good man," she murmured. "You could have let it all burn. Why didn't you?" His lips moved. "Just barely. For you." She sobbed once. Then gathered herself. He couldn't be carried back. Not alone. She looked up. Her eyes scanned the crowd. "Help me," she said. "He saved what he could. He saved me." It was a long moment before someone moved. Then the baker's son stepped forward. "I'll carry the blankets." Then an old trapper. "I'll get the sled." Then, finally, Sheriff Amos. "I'll walk beside you." They pulled Tama onto a plank and dragged him slowly through the snow, back up the ridge. It took the rest of the afternoon. The whole town watched. No one spoke. Inside the cabin, Wisa wiped his burns with clean snow, pressed salve into torn skin, bandaged his chest where the beam had struck. He didn't open his eyes for hours. When he did, it was dusk. The fire burned steady beside them. The air was warm, rich with pine and sage. Wisa sat at his side, her hair down, her dress stained from smoke. "You're not allowed to leave," she whispered. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I wasn't going to," he said. She laughed, a sound caught between grief and disbelief. "You almost did." He reached for her hand. "I stayed because I had something to return to." She leaned down, touched her forehead to his. "You have me." His hand curled around her wrist. "Do I?" She nodded. "All of me. And not because you saved me, but because you saw me." His voice was sandpaper and wind. "Then stay." "I will," she said. "Even when the fire's gone. Even when the world turns again. I will." Spring came 3 weeks later. The trees budded. Ice cracked in the stream. And Wisa planted her first seeds beside the cabin: turnips, onion, sweet root. Tama watched from a chair beneath the cottonwood, his chest wrapped but healing. Children came by now. Sometimes with gifts. Sometimes just to see. Iris never apologized, but she sent flour in a cloth sack with no name stitched on it. Elder Willow visited and smiled at the sight of Wisa braiding her hair while Tama carved small wooden animals by the fire. "You built something," she said to them. "No," Wisa replied. "We stayed through something." That night, Wisa stood at the doorway, looking out over the land still patched with snow. Tama joined her, arms around her waist. "We could have burned," she said. "We did," he replied. She looked up at him. "But we didn't turn to ash." "No," he whispered. "We became fire." Inside, the cabin glowed. Outside, the last snow melted. And the blaze that chose to stay kept them warm forever.